The afternoon light moved across the floor slowly. Thomas had noticed this pattern many times before. The sun changed position with the seasons. Shadows fell differently in winter and summer. The air itself seemed to shift by evening. Thomas arrived at the building before everyone else. His key turned in the glass door early. 6:47 a.m. was earlier than really necessary, but it had become his established habit. The building belonged to him in these hours. It was just Thomas and the building together. He thought of them that way sometimes, as if the building were a living thing, something that needed care and careful attention, something that depended on him to notice. The lobby was built back in 1962. There was something substantial about its design. The floor held a pattern of grey tile. The walls were a soft shade of beige. This colour had been repainted many times. Potted plants stood in the corners of the lobby. A tall plant with broad leaves sat there. It never quite thrived, no matter what. Thomas had learned not to take this personally. The light in the lobby wasn't quite right. Thomas moved through the building with his keys. His clipboard held notes about every system. Most tenants never thought about these systems. They came to work on floors 3 through 9. They rode the elevators without thinking about them. He had worked here for 12 long years. He arrived somewhat by accident at this job. A larger maintenance company had employed him first, but when the manager retired, they offered it. Full-time, permanent, benefits, stability for his daughter. Emma had been in middle school at that time. The security of the job helped them both. He could plan ahead for her future. He could be the kind of father present, the kind who could be there for her. The building was 9 stories tall and built carefully. Its systems had been designed to work together. The electrical system powered every single thing. The water system served bathrooms and kitchens. The HVAC maintained the temperature throughout. Thomas understood these connections through his body. He knew which systems were most critical. He knew which ones had backup redundancies. He knew what would happen if things failed. He had never managed a true emergency, but he thought about it sometimes quietly. What he would do if things went wrong, how he would respond to an emergency. The weight of that responsibility stayed with him. It lived with him in a quiet way. The building had a character Thomas appreciated. It was solid. It was built to last, not fancy, not designed to impress anyone, just designed to function well for many years. The walls were thick. The concrete was good. Thomas sometimes thought about who had built it. The architects, the contractors, the workers assembled it. They had built it to last for generations. They did not cut any kind of corners. They understood it would outlive them all. It would shelter other people in the future. That was a particular kind of responsibility. That was something that Thomas deeply respected. He carried this understanding in his own work. He maintained the building with that same care. His office was in the basement downstairs, a small room next to mechanical systems. It held his desk and all his tools. It held his records and observation notebooks. The heart of the building lived down there. The electrical panel was located in the basement. The main water shut-off valve was there. The HVAC unit hummed quietly down there. The boiler was housed in that same space. The elevator's control systems were also nearby. Everything that kept the building alive lived there. All of it in climate-controlled basement, humming with quiet electrical sounds constantly, making occasional mechanical adjustments as needed, all these systems running together in rhythm. He set down his clipboard and his keys. He stood very still for just a moment. He listened to the building as it woke. There was a quality to the sound, a particular feeling of early morning quiet. Before people arrived and the elevators began, before the constant motion of the working day, the air felt different in these early hours. The light was different too, more soft. The building was mostly asleep but awake. Thomas understood this about buildings instinctively. They had rhythms, they had natural cycles, they had moods, almost, if you wanted. But Thomas usually wasn't poetic about things. Still, the understanding was always there with him. He began his morning checks right away. This was a routine he had done thousands of times. The numbers were almost always the same, or at least very close to same. The pressure in the water system checked out. The temperature of the boilers was normal. The electrical systems showed expected readings. The fire safety systems were all functioning. Everything in its expected normal range stayed. Everything functioned exactly as it should. He noted these things in his logbook. Then he moved upstairs to check spaces. The lobby was clean from the night before. The night custodian had done their careful work. He checked the front door mechanism closely. He checked the windows for any problems. He looked at the main elevator there. It stood silent and patient in the lobby, waiting for the day's activity to finally begin. This was the main elevator, the important one, the one in the center of the lobby. There were two other elevators further back. They served the offices in the rear building. But this main one was the heart. This was where the building's life happened. Thomas had developed a relationship with this elevator. Over his 12 years of careful work, he knew the sounds it made when right. He knew the slight variations in its speed. He knew how long it should take. He knew how long from ground to 9. He knew how doors should open and close. He knew the hydraulic pressure it should have. He knew the cable tensions quite well. He knew it like familiar music, not thinking about it very much consciously, but able to notice immediately when wrong. The building had been built back in 1962. The elevator had arrived the same exact year. Nearly 25 years it had been in service. It had been maintained very carefully over time. It received updates with newer safety features, but it remained fundamentally the same basic unit. It was reliable. It was very dependable. It had become part of the building's identity. People depended on it without any conscious thought. They rode it without noticing it at all. But Thomas noticed everything about how it worked. He understood its patterns and its rhythms. He could hear changes in how it operated. Thomas rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. Then he walked back down the stairs slowly. He stopped at each level to check things. The hallways were quiet in the early morning. Lights came on automatically as he walked. He checked the thermostats on every floor. He looked for signs of any leaks. He searched for any visible problems or issues. Everything was as it should be today. The building was stable, functioning very well. This was the kind of morning he preferred. No problems, no surprises, nothing going wrong. Just the building continuing to be what it was, just the systems running as they should, just another quiet and ordinary morning. He returned to the basement to make notes. He wrote in his log very carefully. Then he prepared himself to go back home. Emma would still be asleep in her bed. He would make coffee when he got there. He would check on her before he left, make sure she had everything that she needed, leave her a note if something came up. Small things, reminders, his presence expressed softly. Through these small gestures and caring actions. His apartment was on the other side of the city, a two-bedroom place he had owned for years. Since Emma was a very young child, the neighborhood was modest and working class. But it was stable and it felt safe. He had made it into their home together. The living room had a couch they picked. Emma had chosen it with him years ago. The kitchen was small, but it was functional. Emma's room was upstairs and filled with things. Her homework spread across her desk usually. Her books sitting on shelves around her room. The evidence of her growing up visible there. One school year at a time unfolding. Thomas watched this quietly as it happened. Emma was 15 years old right now, in those particular teenage years of becoming. She was becoming herself in new ways, ways that were interesting and nice to watch. She was thoughtful, she asked good questions, she asked about how things actually worked. She had her mother's dark hair color, she had her own way of moving, her own way of being in the world. Thomas sometimes caught himself just watching her, aware that she was becoming more independent, that the shape of their life together was slowly and gradually beginning to change. He made coffee when he got home, the apartment filled with the smell of it. He climbed the stairs to her room upstairs. He knocked gently on her bedroom door. Emma was awake, thinking about her day. He sat on the edge of her bed. They did not talk much first thing, but there was comfort in being together, in that quiet time before the day, before everything became busy and loud. Thomas showered and changed out of his work clothes. He had a morning routine separate from the buildings, but it was just as regular and steady, everything in its order, everything in its place. He made Emma breakfast before she left. They sat together at the kitchen table. Emma talked about school and her upcoming test. She talked about a project she was working on. Thomas listened carefully to every word she said. He asked questions when it seemed right to ask. He encouraged her to do well in her work, to think deeply about what she was learning, to take her education seriously going forward. He drove her to school after breakfast. The drive took about 15 minutes to get there. They listened to the radio in the car. Sometimes Emma sang along quietly to the songs. Sometimes they drove in comfortable and easy silence. At the school, he dropped her off. She got out of the car and left. She said, "See you tonight, or I might be late," depending on what she had planned after school. Thomas said okay, and to let him know, she closed the door and walked toward the entrance. He watched her go the way fathers do, the small ritual of letting them go into their day, into their own lives. Then he drove to the building to work, back to his other life, his work life, the life that was separate from Emma, but also entirely connected to her because his work allowed him to provide, to give them their apartment and their life. The building was fully awake by the time he arrived. People moved through the lobby constantly and steadily. The coffee shop was busy with morning customers. The pharmacy had people coming in and out. The elevators moved up and down continuously. The place hummed with the activity of work. Thomas moved through it all with his clipboard, noting things, observing, always paying attention. He was invisible to most of these people. They did not think about him very much. They got on the elevator without wondering about the person who maintained it for them. That was fine. Thomas did not need their notice or their recognition of him. The elevator ran smoothly that first day, and then the next day it did too, and the days after that remained the same. Thomas's routine continued in its established way. Morning checks, daily observations, evening security rounds, everything regular, everything as it should be. Nothing changed, nothing seemed out of place. The building remained stable and very dependable. Thomas remained attentive and very careful. The days continued in their ordinary pattern. One afternoon, Thomas sat in his office. He was reviewing the elevator maintenance log. He noticed something very subtle, the kind of thing only someone aware would notice if they were paying close attention. The elevator had taken slightly longer to travel, not dramatically longer, just a small amount, a fraction of a second perhaps. It suggested that something was not quite right. Everything was functioning. The doors opened normally, people were riding it without any incident, but something was slightly different, slightly off. Thomas had learned to trust these feelings. There was something called listening to a system, really listening, understanding its rhythms. The elevator's rhythm had changed just barely. He decided to investigate this carefully. He rode the elevator up to 9. Then he rode it back down again. He listened very carefully to the sounds. He felt the acceleration and deceleration. He watched the way the doors moved. He tried to isolate what had changed. But everything seemed to be functioning fine. There were no obvious signs of anything wrong. The elevator was not broken, not at all. But it was different. Something was off. Thomas decided to do a more thorough check. He obtained the access codes to get inside, the mechanical spaces where the cables were located. He climbed into that warm space carefully. It was filled with mechanical sounds around, the smell of machine oil and metal. The cables were thick and very strong, designed to lift the car and people. He checked the tensions on every cable. Everything was within the normal range there. He checked the pulley system very carefully. Everything seemed to be correct and fine. He looked at the door mechanisms closely. Everything appeared to be functioning properly. He listened to the motor as it ran. The sound was nearly imperceptible but present. That sound had changed. He was sure. He descended from the mechanical space downward. He went back to his office area. He made notes about his observations there. He decided to monitor it more closely. Over the next few days, very carefully. He would keep track of any changes. He would document what he found out. Then if there was a problem, he would have more information to use. The next day, he rode the elevator multiple times. He paid attention carefully. He noted the small variations he felt. He made notes in his logbook. The day after that, he did the same. He was forming a hypothesis about what might be causing the problem he noticed. Perhaps a slight wear on a part, perhaps a sensor beginning to show age, perhaps something with the lubrication system. He was not sure yet, not quite, but he was gathering information slowly. On the fourth day, something notable occurred. The elevator hesitated. Very briefly, almost not, but there was a pause in the motion. A pause that should not have been there. For just a moment, it seemed to catch. It caught slightly before continuing upward. Thomas was in the lobby at that time. He was waiting for the elevator to arrive. He was planning to do his inspection. He felt the hesitation very clearly. He knew that other people felt it. He waited for the doors to open wide. When the doors opened, a woman stepped out. She was not someone that Thomas recognized. She did not appear to be a tenant. She seemed slightly worried about what happened. She looked at Thomas and asked him. The elevator seemed to stall for a moment. Thomas nodded. He said he had noticed. He said he would investigate the issue. The woman seemed reassured by his calm response. She thanked him and then moved on. Thomas rode the elevator up and down. Several more times he documented each trip. He noted when the hesitation occurred. It happened when the car was full. It happened when it was between floors, between the 5th and 7th floors exactly. This gave him more information to work with. He reached out to his elevator company. They had a service contract with the building. Regular inspections were part of the agreement. Thomas explained what he had been observing. He described the hesitation very carefully. He said he did not think it was in immediate danger of failing at all, but he thought something should be checked. The elevator technician said he would come out. It would probably be the following week. The appointment would be scheduled very soon. In the meantime, Thomas continued observing carefully. He rode the elevator very frequently now. He documented every single trip he made. The hesitation continued. It was very subtle, but it was consistent and very regular. He began to form a clearer picture of what might be causing the problem. The pattern suggested something in the motor, or perhaps something in the drive system, perhaps a component that was wearing out, perhaps something that needed lubrication very soon, perhaps something that needed replacement soon. He was not quite sure yet. He sat at his desk one afternoon and documented everything that he had found. He made a timeline of when it happened. He described the pattern he had noticed. He included notes about when it occurred, when it did not occur at all. He included his thoughts about the cause. It was the kind of detailed observation that Thomas had learned to do over time. It was how you prevented small problems from becoming much larger problems over time. It was how you kept systems running. It was how you did your job well. Emma came to the building with him. One day, after school was finished, she sometimes did this when she needed to work on homework and he couldn't leave his work early to go get her. She sat in his office and did her work while he continued his regular daily duties. She was accustomed to the building by now. She knew the layout quite well. She knew the basement office where he worked. She knew some of the tenants by sight, though she did not know them by name. On this particular day, she asked him about the elevator investigation he was doing. He had mentioned it at home before. She was curious about how work happened. Thomas explained what he had been observing. He took her to the mechanical space and showed her the cables and pulleys. He explained how the system actually worked. He explained what he thought might be wrong and why it mattered very much. Emma listened carefully to every word he said. She asked thoughtful questions about what he was showing her and explaining. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding how things actually functioned in real life. Thomas was reminded that his daughter was becoming someone who wanted understanding, someone who wanted to understand how things work together in systematic ways. She wanted to know the logic. She wanted to see how pieces fit. They stood in the mechanical space together. Thomas pointed out specific components for her. He explained the tension in every cable. He showed her where the motor was. He talked about the wear and tear. That happened over time on systems, even when systems were very well maintained. Emma followed his explanation carefully and closely. She asked if the problem he found would be dangerous for people riding it. Thomas said it was not immediately dangerous, but it was the kind of thing that could become more serious over time if it was not addressed very soon. That was why he was paying attention. That was why he was investigating it. Emma nodded. She seemed satisfied by his answer. She seemed to understand what her father did was important work that mattered, work that required careful, close attention, work that required knowledge and real skill, work that mattered to the building and mattered to the people who used it. The elevator technician arrived on Wednesday afternoon. His name was Mark. Thomas knew him. He had worked on this building before, for about 5 years now, consistently. Thomas and Mark had worked together before on several repairs and maintenance issues. Mark respected Thomas's knowledge and observations. They had a good working relationship. Thomas showed Mark his documentation. He walked him through the hesitation pattern. He explained his theory about the cause. Mark listened carefully to every single thing. Mark nodded as Thomas was speaking. He seemed to take it seriously. Mark performed his own careful inspection. He accessed the same spaces Thomas had. He checked the same components very carefully. He ran his own tests for problems. The inspection took several hours to complete. Thomas assisted where he could help out. Together they narrowed down the possibilities. By the end of the inspection, Mark had identified a wearing component. It was a part that guided the motion, that guided the elevator car's movement carefully. It was not yet completely failed. It was not in immediate danger, but it was showing signs of age. The wearing was creating the hesitation that Thomas had noticed and documented. Mark said that the part should be replaced soon before it failed completely. He said if it was not replaced, it would eventually fail completely one day, and when it failed, the elevator would stop functioning entirely and cease working. That was not an emergency situation. The building had other elevators available, but it was better to replace the part now while it was working, rather than wait for it to fail. Thomas agreed with this approach completely. He helped Mark document what they found. Mark said he would order the replacement part. The part would take about a week. To arrive at the building location, once it arrived, Mark would schedule a time to install it carefully. The installation would require shutting down the main elevator for a few hours. Thomas would need to notify the tenants and the building's management about this. This was exactly the kind of preventative maintenance that Thomas believed in, catching problems early before they got worse, addressing them before they became emergencies, treating the building systems with respect and with care and attention. The replacement part was not cheap, but it was much less expensive than dealing with an elevator failure. That would require emergency service calls and stop the building's circulation. Thomas drafted a notice for the tenants. He explained that the main elevator would be undergoing maintenance next Wednesday. He explained that the other elevators would be available for their use. He said that the maintenance would take approximately 2 hours to complete. He asked that people plan accordingly. He posted the notice in the lobby. He put one in the main stairwell. He sent email notifications to the tenants. He felt that people deserved adequate warning when something like this would be happening in the building. It was a matter of respect. The following week passed in normal ways. The replacement part arrived on schedule. Mark called to confirm the installation date. Everything was set and ready to go. On the Wednesday of the installation, Thomas was in the basement very early. He had turned off the main elevator. The building's other 2 elevators were working. Mark arrived with his tools and the part. Together they accessed the elevator systems. The installation required very careful work. The old component had to be removed. The new component had to be installed. It had to be calibrated correctly. It had to be tested thoroughly. It had to be adjusted very carefully until it was working perfectly. Mark and Thomas worked methodically through the entire detailed process very carefully. It was technical work, very careful work, the kind of work that required knowledge and care and close attention. By late afternoon, they had finished. Mark tested the elevator many times. It moved smoothly, very smoothly. The hesitation was completely gone now. The movement was exactly as it should be. Thomas tested it several more times himself. He rode the car all the way up. He rode it all the way down. He listened carefully to the sounds. He felt the acceleration and deceleration. Everything was perfect, completely perfect. The elevator had been restored completely to its proper normal functioning. He put the elevator back into service. The tenants could resume using it. For most of them, they would never know that anything had been wrong. They would not know that a problem had been detected and then prevented. They would simply ride the elevator, as they always did every day, unaware that they were benefiting from Thomas's careful attention and preventative maintenance. This was something that Thomas understood about his work over the years. Much of the value in what he did was invisible to people. The problems that were prevented, the systems that continued running smoothly, because they had been properly maintained, most people would never know about it. Most people would never recognize his work. Most people would never acknowledge it. And that was okay with Thomas. He did not do his job for recognition or for thanks from people. He did it because it mattered, because buildings needed to be cared for, because people depended on these systems without even thinking about them at all. A week after the elevator repair, a woman arrived to view an office. She was there for the 5th floor. The space had been empty for months. The building's management was looking for a new tenant to move in. The woman was scheduled for a tour. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Thomas noticed her in the lobby. He did not know why he noticed. Perhaps he was more aware because of the elevator repair that had happened. Perhaps it was something about her. She seemed to look at the space with careful attention that suggested that she was taking it seriously. He watched as she took the elevator up to the 5th floor with the property management agent who worked there. He did not think much about it. Tenants came and went quite regularly. People looked at spaces very often. Some stayed, some moved on. This was simply part of the building's natural cycle and life. The woman was back in the building several days later with the agent. She seemed to be moving in. There was moving equipment in the lobby. There were boxes and furniture accumulating. On the 5th floor in the space, Thomas noted that the elevator was being used more frequently now. He made sure to monitor it to ensure it was handling the traffic well and performing as it should. It was. It continued to work smoothly and reliably as expected over the course of the next week. The woman gradually moved into the office. Thomas observed this from a distance quietly. He saw her occasionally in the lobby or in the stairwell of the building. She seemed to be setting up some kind of office or workspace. There were boxes of equipment there. There were what looked like filing cabinets. The space was being organized carefully. One afternoon, the woman approached Thomas. In the lobby where he was standing, she asked him a question about the building's temperature control and systems. She said her office space felt slightly warm in the afternoons. She wondered if there was any way to adjust the temperature in there. Thomas said he could look into it. He asked what floor she was on. She said the 5th floor. He said he would check the thermostat in that area to see what might be happening there. That afternoon, Thomas went to 5. He found the thermostat for that section. He checked the settings on it. He examined the HVAC ductwork there. He identified that the space in question had a duct that was slightly undersized for the space's volume. This was causing the space to receive less air conditioning than it should be receiving from the system. It was a small problem, easily fixable with some adjustments. He adjusted the damper slightly to redirect more air to that space. He also noted that he could order a slightly larger duct section if the tenant wanted a more permanent solution later on. He made a note to follow up with the woman about what options she might want. The next time he saw her, he explained what he had found. He said he had adjusted the airflow in her space. The space should feel cooler now, he said, if she wanted a more permanent upgrade. He could arrange for a larger duct to be installed there later. She thanked him very much. She said that the adjustment would probably be sufficient for now. She appreciated his quick response to her request about the temperature. This became the beginning of their small interactions with each other. The woman would occasionally ask Thomas questions about the building. She asked about power capacity. She asked about internet connectivity. She asked about the security systems. Thomas answered her questions carefully. He provided her with information. He was professional and helpful over the course of several weeks. These interactions continued and deepened. The woman seemed genuinely interested in understanding how the building worked. She asked questions that suggested she had some technical knowledge. She understood the jargon quite well. She understood the concepts involved. Thomas found himself respecting her interest and her intelligence. He looked forward to seeing her. One afternoon, as they waited for the main elevator to arrive, the woman asked Thomas a question. She asked if he had noticed any issues with the elevator. She said she had felt it hesitate about a month ago, but it seemed fine now. Thomas said yes, there had been a small issue with a component. He said that the component had been replaced about a month before where they were standing. He said the elevator should be functioning properly now. The woman seemed genuinely interested in his explanation of what had happened to the elevator. She asked what component it was. She asked what the symptoms had been. Thomas explained the situation in simple terms that she could understand completely and clearly. The woman listened carefully to everything that he told her. She asked follow-up questions. The conversation extended beyond what was really necessary to discuss. She seemed to actually care about understanding what had happened when the elevator arrived and the doors opened up wide. The woman said that she appreciated his clear explanation. She said she was impressed by how carefully he seemed to maintain the entire building. She said most buildings did not have someone who paid that level of attention to detail. Thomas said he took his work very seriously, always and every day. The elevator doors opened wide. The woman stepped inside the car. The doors closed. The elevator ascended. Thomas thought about the conversation afterward. He was not quite sure why it had affected him. It was simply that the woman had noticed something about his work. She had recognized the care that he put into his job. That recognition meant something to him. It meant more than he expected. A few weeks later, the woman approached Thomas again at the building. This time she asked something different. She asked if he would be interested in collaborating on a building assessment project. She explained that she ran a consulting company focused on infrastructure and systems optimization. She said she was new to the area and was looking for projects to work on. She said she had been impressed by the building itself. She was impressed by Thomas's obvious knowledge of how it worked. She asked if the building's management might be interested in a comprehensive assessment of all the building's systems and their current condition and future needs. Thomas was slightly taken aback by this kind of offer. He said the building seemed to be functioning well overall. He was not sure that a comprehensive assessment was really necessary at this point in time. The woman said the assessment was not about finding problems. It was about understanding the building's condition completely and deeply, and identifying any opportunities for optimization or improvement she said she could offer her time at a reduced rate because she found the building interesting and wanted to work on the project very much. Thomas said he would need to check with management first, but he said he was interested in the idea overall. The woman gave him her contact information for later. She said to let her know if management wanted to discuss the idea further and more. Thomas brought the proposal to the building's management company later. He explained what the woman had suggested and what she proposed to do for them. Management seemed cautiously interested. They scheduled a meeting with the woman to hear more about what she was proposing to do. The meeting took place on a Friday afternoon in the lobby. The woman presented her ideas very clearly and very professionally. She explained what a systems assessment would entail in detail. She explained the potential value. She was not trying to sell something to the management. She was trying to understand the building and help the owners make informed decisions. Management agreed to move forward with a preliminary assessment. This began a period of several weeks where Thomas and the woman spent considerable time together in the building. They moved through the spaces, systematically examining systems. They took notes carefully. They had conversations about how the building functioned and what its needs might be. Thomas found that he enjoyed this kind of work very much. It gave him a reason to think deeply about the building in entirely new ways. The woman brought a different perspective to the space entirely. She understood technical systems well, but she also understood broader efficiency and optimization concepts. She could see the building from multiple different angles. The woman asked Thomas about his background in this work, how he had come to work in building maintenance, how long he had been doing this kind of work, what had drawn him to it. Thomas answered her questions honestly. He talked about starting in maintenance work somewhat by accident. He talked about how he had come to love this particular building very much, how he appreciated the responsibility of keeping it functioning well. The woman listened carefully to everything that he told her. She asked thoughtful follow-up questions. She seemed to understand something essential about why he did the work that he did. She said she had spent many years in corporate work. She said she had gotten tired of the structures and the office politics involved. She decided to start her own consulting business because she wanted to work on projects that interested her very much. She wanted to work with people she truly respected. She said that Thomas's knowledge and care for his building was exactly the kind of thing that interested her. Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened and grew. They talked about buildings and systems, but also other things. They talked about life choices. They talked about the kind of work that mattered most. They talked about what it meant to do something well. Thomas found himself looking forward to seeing the woman when she came to work. He found himself thinking about her after she had left. These were new feelings for him. It had been a long time since he felt a connection with another adult in this particular kind of way. The systems assessment project continued for several months and more. There were additional components to evaluate in the building the HVAC system required significant attention and careful study. The system was aging, it was still very functional, but it would likely need replacement within the next year, or perhaps within 2 years. The woman and Thomas documented the system's condition very carefully. They discussed options for either upgrading or replacing it entirely. During this time, Emma came to the building occasionally. She observed the growing closeness between Thomas and the woman. One day, after the woman had left the building, Emma asked her father if he liked the woman very much. Thomas said yes, he did. He said he respected her. He said she was intelligent. He said she was interesting. Emma smiled and asked something. She asked if the woman seemed important in some way, not because of how she dressed or acted at all, but because she carried herself like someone used to responsibility. Thomas was struck by how perceptive his daughter could be. Emma had seen something true about the woman and about how his father felt. The systems assessment was eventually completed after several months. The woman prepared a comprehensive report for the management. It detailed the condition of all the various systems. It made recommendations about what work should be done. The HVAC system replacement was recommended as a priority, but the recommendations were realistic and practical overall, not pushing unnecessary work, just honest assessment of needs. The building's management reviewed the report very carefully. They were impressed by it. They decided to move forward with some of the work. Thomas was asked to coordinate with contractors on the work. The woman was asked to oversee the projects to ensure that the upgrades were done properly and according to plan. This meant that Thomas and the woman would be working together for many more weeks. They would oversee the HVAC replacement and all the work. They would manage contractor work. They would ensure that the new systems integrated properly with the building's existing systems. Summer arrived while this work was ongoing and in progress. The building underwent its first phase of upgrades carefully. There was some disruption. The HVAC system was being replaced with new equipment. There was noise from the contractor work crews. There were times when sections of the building were affected, but it was managed carefully. Thomas coordinated with contractors. The woman ensured the work was done correctly and well. One evening after work, after the day's work was finished and they were done, the woman invited Thomas and Emma to dinner together. She suggested a restaurant not far from the building. She said she wanted to know the community better. She said she valued their friendship very much. The dinner was pleasant. The three of them sat together in a booth. They talked about the building. They talked about the city. They talked about their lives. Emma seemed comfortable with the woman right away. She observed the interactions between her father and the woman very carefully. Later, after the dinner, when Thomas and Emma were driving home in his car, Emma said that the woman seemed to care about what her father thought very much. She said that Thomas seemed more engaged when the woman was around. Thomas did not say much in response to Emma, but he knew that Emma had seen something true. The summer progressed and continued. The building's upgrades continued. The new HVAC system was successfully installed there. It was more efficient than the old system. It maintained temperature better. The air quality improved. Tenants noticed the improvement. They commented on how much more comfortable there. Offices felt and seemed. Thomas walked through the building. One afternoon in early autumn, the leaves were beginning to change color outside. The light was shifting toward the longer shadows of fall and winter. The building felt full of the satisfaction of a job very well done. The upgrades were complete. The systems were running. The building was good. The woman's project was formally concluded and finished. The assessment was complete. The recommendations had been implemented throughout the building, but the woman did not leave the building afterwards. She remained in her office. On the 5th floor, she continued her consulting work and her business. She and Thomas continued to see each other. It was not dramatic. It was simply that they had chosen to keep being part of each other. They were staying connected. They were staying present in each other's lives. They had dinners together. They walked through the city. Emma was around sometimes. The woman became a presence in Thomas's life. That felt natural and important to him. There was no dramatic moment where they defined what they were to each other. There was just a quiet recognition that they had chosen to keep being connected to each other in their lives. Thomas's work continued on. His morning routine remained the same as always. He arrived at the building before anyone else came. He checked the systems. He walked through the spaces. He maintained the building. The building responded to his care by continuing to function smoothly, by providing shelter and service to all the people who inhabited it. One afternoon, a young man came to the building. He was asking about maintenance work and employment. He said he was new to the city. He said he was interested in learning how to do building maintenance. He said he had heard that the building's maintenance manager was someone who actually knew his systems well and thoroughly. He asked if there was any possibility of learning from Thomas here. Thomas was surprised by the request at first, but he thought about what it might mean to pass knowledge forward, to share what he had learned over the years. He thought about the importance of someone being genuinely interested in learning. He offered the young man an opportunity to work with him as an apprentice to learn the systems, to develop the skills and knowledge that the work would require over time and with practice. The apprenticeship began in autumn when it turned cold. The young man came to the building several days a week to learn from Thomas. Thomas taught him the mechanical systems carefully. He explained how the building actually functioned daily. He taught him to listen to systems closely, to notice when something was not quite right or seemed off, to understand why it mattered, to prevent problems, to take pride in work that might never be noticed by people. The young man was a good learner always. He paid close attention. He asked good questions. He seemed to understand that Thomas was teaching him something that mattered, something beyond just the technical aspects of work. He was learning a way of thinking about responsibility and care. Thomas often found himself thinking about how he had come to work almost by accident, how he had not expected to find meaning in maintaining a building, how he had not expected to find other People who understood the value of that work. The woman understood, Emma understood, the apprentice was beginning to understand. The seasons continued, their progression forward. Winter arrived cold, the building's heating systems worked steadily. The new HVAC system maintained heat well. Snow fell outside. The building remained warm and functional. Thomas's daily work continued as always. His care for the building continued. His relationship with the woman deepened gradually over time. One evening in late winter, Thomas sat in his apartment with Emma and the woman. They were not doing anything special. Emma was doing her homework. The woman was reading quietly and calmly a book. Thomas was thinking about work things. They were simply together in the same space and sharing time, comfortable in each other's presence. This felt real. To Thomas, this felt like a life that was working well. He thought about the evening he had first noticed the elevator hesitation, how that small attention to detail had led to so many things. The repair work, the woman arriving, the systems assessment, the building upgrades, the deepening of his connection with another adult finally, the beginning of teaching an apprentice, the transformation of his life in ways he had not anticipated at all. The building had been the container for all of this. The building was where everything happened. His careful attention to the building's systems had been the foundation for everything else. One afternoon in spring, Thomas stood in the basement mechanical room with the apprentice. The young man was learning about the elevator systems. Thomas explained the components carefully and slowly to him. He showed the cables and pulleys. He explained why. Understanding how systems worked mattered so much. He talked about the value of preventative maintenance work. The apprentice listened very carefully to everything Thomas said. He seemed to understand what Thomas was teaching him. He asked good questions and took notes in a notebook he carried. He was beginning to develop his own sense of responsibility and care for the building. Thomas realized he was experiencing something that had never occurred to him. He was passing forward what he had learned over many years of careful work and attention to detail. He was teaching someone else how to care for something larger than themselves alone, how to do work that might never be recognized, how to find meaning in that invisible care and attention always, how to take responsibility for the spaces where people lived and worked. This felt very significant to him, the apprentice said. He was grateful for this opportunity. He said that most people did not seem to understand why this work mattered so much at all. He said that Thomas had helped him see clearly that it did matter quite deeply, that caring about your work mattered, that doing things well mattered very much always and forever going forward. Thomas nodded his head slowly and calmly with care. He said that was exactly right. That was the core of all of this work, doing things well, caring about the work that you do every day, not for recognition, not for gratitude, but because the work mattered truly, because buildings depended on it, because people depended on it. The seasons continued, their natural cycles. Spring moved towards summer slowly and gradually as time passed along forward. The building existed in its steady and reliable way. Systems ran smoothly. People moved through the spaces daily. Thomas maintained it. The woman worked in her office. The apprentice learned. Emma progressed in her final year. Life continued in all its ordinary, unfolding ways. One evening, Thomas stood in the lobby and looked at the main elevator there, the one he had repaired months before in detail, the one that had been the beginning of all of this change. It moved smoothly, it functioned well, it served the building without complaint, without recognition at all, simply doing its purpose and its job very well. Every day he thought about his role in that elevator's life. He thought about his role in the building's life. He thought about how careful attention and responsibility for something beyond yourself alone could ripple out in ways you could not anticipate or expect when you started working on something, could lead to connections, could lead to growth and change, could lead to a life that was deeper and more meaningful than you had imagined possible in any way at all. The elevator doors opened slowly there. A few tenants stepped out into the lobby space. They moved on their way to their work without thinking about the elevator or the person who maintained it. They simply went about their days, unaware of the visible care that made their days possible to live. That was okay.
Thomas did not need them to think about it. He had his daughter Emma. He had a woman who respected him. He had work that mattered. He had building that depended on him to care. He had a young man who was learning from him patiently and well over time. He had a life that continued to deepen and grow and change in ways he had not anticipated at all when he woke. That morning, when he first noticed the elevator, hesitation and paid attention, the building settled into its evening routine slowly. Systems adjusted, the heating shifted to nighttime mode, lighting dimmed in areas that were no longer occupied by anyone at all. The building prepared for rest. Tomorrow it would wake and function again as always and forever, and Thomas would be there as he always was every morning, checking systems, maintaining spaces, caring for the building and everything in it.
The lobby grew quiet. The entrance doors were locked up. The night custodian moved through spaces with supplies. Thomas completed his final checks of the day. Everything was as it should be. Everything was functioning well. The building was secure and stable, ready for the night. He left as darkness fell outside. He drove home through quiet city streets calmly. Emma would be home doing homework or reading or simply being there in their space together. The woman probably still in her office working. She often worked late into evening, but she would leave eventually and go back home to rest there. Tomorrow she would return. Thomas would see her. Their lives would continue being connected to each other and to the building that had brought them together. He parked his car. He climbed the stairs to the apartment slowly. He opened The door. Emma looked up from
her homework, she asked. How his day had been for him that day. He said it was good. The building is running well. Everything is functioning properly today. Emma smiled. She understood what he meant by that simple statement about his work. She understood that her father's happiness was tied to his work and what he did every day, that doing something well mattered, that caring about something beyond yourself mattered very much always. She had learned this from watching him work over many years of growing up. They sat together and had dinner. They talked about the day quietly. The evening settled around them slowly, quiet and peaceful and full of the ordinary contentment that comes from being part of each other's lives. The building continued its quiet existence across the city that night. Very quietly, the elevator sat still in the lobby, ready for
tomorrow's activity. The mechanical systems rested. The HVAC system hummed, quietly maintaining the building's temperature well. Everything was steady and stable and ready for tomorrow to come along. By tomorrow, the building would be awake again. People would arrive to work and use it. The elevator would begin its constant motion up and down. Work would resume as always and forever, and Thomas would be there as he always was, watching carefully, maintaining spaces, caring for the systems and the spaces and the people who depended on them, continuing the work that mattered deeply, continuing to be responsible for something beyond himself, continuing to do what was necessary to keep the building standing and functioning and serving the people who inhabited it. The city quieted for the night. The buildings stood solid in the darkness outside, serving their
purposes without complaint or recognition from anyone at all, simply being what they had been built to be. And inside each building there was someone like Thomas there, someone who cared for the spaces, someone who paid attention, someone who did the invisible work that made everything else possible to continue on. The evening deepened slowly, the night gathered around, and Thomas slept knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of work, another day of care, another day of connecting with the building and the people in his life and his world. Another day of doing what mattered, another day of being responsible for something beyond himself alone. The building stood steady, the elevator sat waiting, the systems rested calmly. Everything was as it should be, and it would remain that way because someone had chosen to pay attention to it closely.
because someone had chosen to care, because someone had chosen to do the work well without needing anyone to notice. That was enough. That was everything that mattered truly. The night moved slowly. Toward morning, the city slept soundly, the building dreamed its building dreams, and in the morning Thomas would arrive as he always did to begin another day of caring for the spaces that sheltered and served the lives of ordinary people going about their ordinary days. Everything was quiet now, everything was still and calm, everything was at rest there. Tomorrow would come along, the building would wake, work would resume once more again, life would continue on, for now there was only the stillness of nighttime, the quiet rhythm of a building at rest, the peace of work completed well, the contentment of a life that had found its purpose and its people too.
Sleep now, if you are ready. The building will be there in the morning. The work will continue. The connections will deepen. The ordinary days will unfold in all their quiet significance. For now, just rest. Let the building rest. You let the elevator wait patiently there. Let the systems hum their quiet songs softly. Let the night settle slowly over everything that exists there. Let your mind drift away from the day and toward the peace of sleep. The building stands steady, the work continues on, and everyone in their own way rests well. Good night.